society teaches men that the only acceptable outlets for experiencing emotions are through anger and sex. It leads to this epidemic of women who are having performative sex.
Capitalism, white supremacy, like America's built on this wounded patriarchy. Let's get into how this affects men's mental health.
Men are socialized very young not to feel, and we as women are socialized not to care that men don't feel.
We talk a lot about core wounds here, and I would love to dig into the concept of these like collective wounds.
We do a lot as women to protect the male ego, and men do their own version of some of this manipulation with us, but these are the things that really start off our relationships with a baseline of sort of coercion and mistrust, and then it's like, why do I feel so disconnected from this person and really so unsafe in this relational dynamic? If men are numbing the feminine aspects of who they are, the feminine is actually the driver of sensual energy, right? So when men are in this space of constantly like, I just want to have sex with you, I just want validation from you, it's actually really them and their wounded feminine. I believe the future of relationships is that we're going to join in relationships when it's justified, not because we're incomplete. Like on my Instagram, I always write in lowercase, which drives my friend Vanessa crazy.
Vanessa?
Hey,
You.
Vanessa.
And she's a Taurus, P.S.
Hi.
Wow.
I mean, wow.
Just new best friend?
New best friend.
Did we just become best friends?
We did. We truly did. What an episode we have in store for you all today. Meadow, tell them who we have today.
Let me take it. Today we had Dené Logan, MFT, which stands for Marriage and Family Therapist, spiritual teacher, and author of Sovereign Love, a guide to healing relationships by reclaiming the masculine and feminine within. She's also the co-host of a weekly podcast, Cheaper Than Therapy, which gives listeners a behind-the-scenes look at coaching sessions with actual clients, interviews with thought leaders in the field of mental health and wellness, and a bird's-eye view between two therapists hashing it out with current life struggles and perspectives on various hot topics. And let me just say, this is her first book, and this book made it so fast to the TMV required reading list, it's not even funny.
It's on the book report list.
Exactly.
It's a must read. This was such a special episode. I don't even want to go into themes because I will not stop talking about it, and I just want you guys to get to the meat of this episode. But what an incredible thought leader and deeply needed perspective Dené has. And I'm just so grateful that she came on the podcast and was able to share her amazing work with us. So without further ado, please enjoy today's episode with Dené Logan. So anyway, we're friends. That's what we're deciding.
Like, listen.
We're here. We've landed.
I
Here we
am
are.
so in love with you both 2 minutes in.
Thank God. Thank God it's reciprocated.
You knew. You already knew.
Sorry. Now, before we totally dive in, what's your big three?
Oh.
I'm like, we're keeping it.
I'm like, we're keeping it in, but
Capricorn Sun, Libra Moon, and
sorry.
Scorpio Ascendant. What are yours?
Okay.
We both have Capricorn mothers, and she's dating a Capricorn.
And
which
I'm
is
a
why we're
Capricorn
like,
rising.
Oh.
I love Capricorns. I'm a Taurus.
Okay.
So I love my earth sign
All my
people.
people are Tauruses.
When's your birthday, though?
Yeah.
January 19th. So I'm sort of Capricornus.
Yeah.
Right on the
You're
cusp.
right there.
Aquarius.
You're right there. Taurus, Sun, Capricorn rising, Aries moon.
And I'm like the most Libra possible.
Yeah, she is.
Like Libra Sun, Libra rising, Sag moon.
Oh.
But so you have
Yeah.
the Cap, you have the Libra. I'm like,
so
it's all
clear.
here.
It's also
clear now.
Yeah. She's my leash child, is what I call her. I'm just like the one grounding her, and she's like the kid at Disney that's like literally on a leash. So
I figured
so
we
excited.
had to start with this because we know we're going to get into some Age of Aquarius stuff. So I'm like,
know-
I had to
you
start by
already
knowing,
know.
you know?
That's so good.
Before we just dive into all of the things, we start every single episode by asking our guests what they're currently unpacking.
Oh.
And that can mean however you want to take it.
I had to take a big breath on that one,
Yeah.
Gabby. What am I currently unpacking? I think this thing of, it's something around like everything you like wanted and dreamt of, and that can be just like a lot to hold, sometimes less for you than the people around you, I think sometimes. And so there's a little bit of navigation around like the realized felt sense of how we, I would say women especially, sometimes make ourselves a little bit smaller to not ruffle the feathers of some of the people in our worlds. And just like unapologetically taking up space in like a a different way, but it feels really good. And then there's also, I mean, like I have a 7-year-old, so there's also like the mama stuff around that,
right.
like all of the internalized, like all the opportunities and things that I'm really grateful for all around with, you know, this book that feel like, yeah, this is not about me and bigger than me. And I have like this beautiful little being who's constantly like, Mama, come back, right? So it's a little bit of that energy of like, you know, but as much as like as a therapist, I know it's good for him to see mommy loving what she does.
Totally.
Yeah.
We often say that in terms of when you say like getting the dream, like you don't always know the conditions you're manifesting.
Yes.
Like you get the thing and then the side products of that and what comes up, you're always like, ooh, didn't realize it would come through this way. But like you said, it's all good stuff. It's all good navigation. But it's interesting to have the thing come out or like the thing manifest and then everything that comes along with it that you don't quite think of when you're building to something.
Yeah. And also, too, I mean, what you were saying hit me really deeply. I grew up with a mom watching her work, and she was so busy and built this incredible career. And it was really good for me as her child to see her fulfill her dreams. But I can imagine the feeling of conflict that she might have felt too. And it's interesting too, like even, you know, now almost 30 years later, of the fact the way that our society is structured, especially for women that are mothers, is like you can't be 50% mom, 50% boss. You are expected from a society perspective to just give 100% of yourself to every single department. And as someone who wants to be a mom and also has big dreams, I love getting to talk to women about that perspective that are living through it, because it must feel, I don't want to put emotions into your mouth, but I wonder, like, I just wonder if it feels frustrating for you to feel like you're like, why can men move in the world where people are excited around them when they get the promotion or they get the thing, and it's not like, okay, well, how are you going to show up for your family now, and how are you going to show up for that?
That part, yeah. I think it's interesting because I think I waited so long to have a child because for whatever reason, I sort of intuitively knew that some of this was going to be challenging for me. I think in the relationship with my kiddo's dad, he is so much more, interestingly, what it would be the societal construct of the more maternal energy in terms of like he's on top of all the things. Yesterday we had no camp and he was like, of course you didn't know that. But like I'm always the one that's like, I lean on him a lot because those things tend to feel more natural for him. And there's a lot of what you're speaking to, like I will be leading a retreat somewhere away and people always like, and women always ask me like, who's with your kiddo? And my kid's dad's an actor and would be gone for like a month at a time. And no one has ever asked him like, who's with the child, kid, right? These are just a part of what it is. There's still like that societal pressure, even though like me within myself, I'm like, he gets something different from me. Like, I think he knows, like, daddy is sort of that, like, base of certain things in his life. He loves the play dates. I don't do those. Like, that type of energy. But it's a little bit, like, still that internalized conditioning that I should feel some kind of way about that I, like, have that inner grappling with, you know, in my humanity.
Yeah. I wonder if, I mean, we'll get into this because this was in your book. Your book taught me how when women have babies at the very beginning, it's so much more masculine energy. I've never heard anyone phrase it that way, which is so interesting. So I wonder if that's almost a space that's like allowed to manifest in balance when you have a man that is tapped into the feminine in a healthy way. How interesting.
Yeah. And he, I am so fortunate that he is. I think he had a single mom, so he's very like conscious of like the details and what is necessary to kind of keep a household afloat. And that's just a lot of his energy anyway. But yes, to your point, Meadow, I had never thought about, and a lot of this is our societal constructs and that we are in this nuclear family structure that I don't think actually supports motherhood in the way that it could conceivably make it a little bit less of that masculine energy and containment, and you're on and you're exhausted and you're really dictating and really like removed from your feminine. I would say and say to couples for at least the first couple years that it just is so a woman in her masculine and heteronormative dynamics that it almost feels like a battle of the alphas inevitably for the two people in it, and it brings a lot of strife for couples because there's just like a lot of like what makes sense. A woman is really sort of like hyper-focused, understandably and necessarily, on keeping this kid alive. But a lot of times the man in her life can feel inept or like a barrier to what she's trying to do. And like any of his questions just feel like he doesn't get it. And she's so hungry to feel really understood and connected in that way that if we had a bunch of women surrounding us, we would probably feel that, but we've really lost that. And I am the most introverted person and had never been like, I need women, like, than I ever had, because I was just so in this like masculine space that felt like unnatural and really uncomfortable. Like I kind of hated the way it felt as much as I was in love with this little being. I really didn't like the way I felt in my skin.
I'm so grateful to like have that prep from your book, because that's absolutely not something I've heard mothers speak to yet. And it makes no sense, especially the way you describe it and how we know men seek problem solution more than women seek the like connectivity. I mean, before I put the cart in front of the horse, because we need to get into the juiciness of this book, but I want to start with kind of what we were speaking to offline. You are my favorite blend of science and source. Like you are my young Ram Dass balance act. Like you even like you referenced both of them in the book, and I was just like, I mean, this is why we're best friends already.
We are best friends after that. My God,
but I know even if when I was in college, like there was no amount of like existentialism, big picture, like sure in the Jungian way, but not in the Ram Dass Eckhart Tolle way. Yes. So how did you were you always like that? Did you know in your practice, did it develop? Like tell me how you got to that balance.
Well, yes and no. And I think I was always a spiritual seeker. I loved Oprah's Soul series at an age that was probably a little odd for me to be obsessed with like Oprah radio and in the car. But at the same time, I was grappling with a lot of those things for myself and finding, just a little bit of peace in my own skin. But the spiritual seeking was always like the consistent that I came back to. And there were just certain spiritual teachers, Michael Beckwith, Wayne Dyer, Caroline Myss, like Eckhart Tolle, who they would say things and it was like you hear things for the first time. And I can tell in both of your faces that you understand what I mean when I say this. It's like I'm hearing this for the first time, but I know this is a truth that I know. I know this is something that some part of me just has known always. And I got so fed by that. I felt like, oh, this is like the Raja, the life force. Like when I hear these spiritual truths, I was a yoga teacher for a long time before I went back to grad school to become a therapist. So it was like there was always this like pulling of the Eastern and Western traditions and attempting to like figure out how to integrate them in a way that felt true for me. And then when I became a therapist, for whatever reason, I just realized I had an affinity for couples work, and it just like gelled and it felt good and made sense. But nobody was sort of speaking about couples work through that lens of like, how do we, really blend the soul and the tangible, like we have to do the things of life together. And have, get our bills paid and all of that. But to me, without that, I just was so aware that it's like, God, we're not really loving one another as we're attempting to love one another. Not really. And so I started to work with couples with that perspective in the back of my mind.
It's so, so cool. Because I feel the same way. I told you a little bit. Like I did the direct service thing and I did the study psychology thing. I didn't get licensed, but my own personal background of my life through a lot of like early teenage trauma was always the spiritual stuff. My mom gave me a Ram Dass book when I was 14, so I always had that, but I didn't quite label it, I think, till getting in the field and trying to do that direct service. And then what it required of me ended up needing to tap into that spiritual side in a way I didn't see. So it makes so much sense to me through your lens, seeing that play out in couples and like the love that you speak to. Like you can't science your way into love. At some point it gets bigger than that.
Speak on it.
I see it so clearly and I love it. It's so good.
No, you're speaking our language. I know I'm such a practical, I mean, I'm a Taurus. Like I'm most grounded. Like I need proof. Yeah. Like I need proof. Exactly. I need proof. I'm that type of person, but I'm also such a dreamer.
Yeah.
And so I've always been that way, where I've had these very big goals and very big dreams and very, what people would say is just like these rose-colored glasses on about the way that I want my home life to be and that I want my career to be. And for me, especially, just bear with me if you're not into astrology, but just like the way that my chart is even set up, like home and family is a major priority for me. And so that's also been a fun exploration of getting to hear thought leaders like yourself speak on things like this, because it helps my brain rationalize the things that I'm already thinking, that I already felt in my heart of like, I read it recently in the book, The Psychology of Money.
Oh, yeah.
And he is talking about it through a money lens, but it makes a lot of sense. And he says in that book, he's like, sometimes something along the lines of paraphrasing of sometimes the right answer is not the smart answer. And I think about that with now, you know, navigating the relationship that I'm in and just being an adult and making decisions for myself that are both in my brain practical, but also might not make sense to a lot of people and might not be logical to a lot of people. But anyway.
I love that.
Yeah. We talk a lot about core wounds here. And I would love to dig into the concept of these like collective wounds, of the collective masculine and feminine.
Yes.
Because I don't think we talk about that enough as a society. And I love how you put it, where you talk about how the values that society values perpetuate these wounds really deeply, which makes sense because, as you talk about in the book, this capitalist society that we live in, you say, is strengthened by a lack of emotional maturity. And so I would love to dig into what these core wounds are.
Yeah.
Of the collective masculine feminine and how they end up presenting.
Yeah, you know, I think when I when I started to do couples work, what became clear to me was that there's a way that we have been conditioned, most of us, for a lifetime to be in really sort of adversarial, underneath the surface energy with one another. And a lot of times that was sort of passed down from the messaging that we got from our mothers, or the way that men are socialized in terms of who they get to be and how they get to show up. And, you know, to me, the one thing that nobody was talking about in terms of couples work and this relational work was the framework of a patriarchal structure. And if we go back and look at the history of patriarchy and how all of this began, there is a way that a dominance-based culture has conditioned all of us to really not be in the space of authentic love, but sort of be in the negotiations around fear. A patriarchal structure sort of was originated in pulling women out of sort of these feminine ways of being that are in alignment with their essence. It used to be that women sat in circles under the moon, and we're really aware of their moon cycles, right? And used to really be connected to the earth and all of the earth's medicine and all of the wisdom in the cycles of the seasons, all of these things. Like, we, as women, that used to be our superpower. And most of us didn't grow up even learning about matriarchal cultures as a thing that was ever a thing, right?
Yeah.
And so in order for patriarchy to be formed, there was the need for fear to be instilled in women. And how that was done and how these nuclear family structures sort of originated was a man got the promise of not only a plot of land, but also a woman. Just like, you know, people had slaves, women were basically property. And if women wouldn't fall in line with either after they'd lost a husband and they didn't want to get remarried, or if women just didn't want to get married, period, there were consequences like calling women witches and burning them alive, and things that we just have never had a reckoning with societally. But if you think about the generational trauma and pain points around that, there's a way that the collective of women, or the feminine, really sort of had this internalized mistrust for the masculine, and that's been passed down generationally. And so there's all of these ways that I realized we're having intimacy with someone, or someone sleeping in the bed next to us, but we're still sort of carrying this generational trauma of the ways that we live in a dominance-based culture. And that's like all of the history of, you know, certainly in Western culture, that this is based on how we oppressed various groups of people to dominate them, to take what we wanted. And that is true of our relationships as well. So a lot of what I talk about is like, this was an ownership-based template that all of this is sort of centered around. We've never really had conversations around it. If you look at the research around most of the relational models that we're still drawing from today in couples therapy modalities, it's normally based on research that was done in the 70s for the most part. And, you know, it wasn't until like 1974 that women could have their own bank account and credit cards.
Right.
And so it's like none of these things are being taken into account in terms of like how honest we're being about what actually leads to relational fulfillment. But if my survival depends on you and I need you to have, you know, a life and survival and money, yeah, there's a lot of ways I'm going to sugarcoat certain things. And I realized, like, I know for myself in relationships, there are ways that I manipulated men in my life, or like wasn't always honest about things, or told men what I thought they could tolerate hearing. And that's a big thing that I think we never talk about, right? Like, we do a lot as women to protect the male ego, and you know, men do their own version of some of this manipulation with us, but these are the things that really start off our relationships with a baseline of sort of coercion and mistrust, and then it's like, why do I feel so disconnected from this person and really so unsafe in this relational dynamic, you know?
I mean, that sentence of just the negotiation of fear. That is, I can just see that being the root, because even as you're speaking of the way that we might manipulate the men in our lives out of just need and desire, it is that need of that fear. At least I know from my perspective and my lived experience is like, I'm doing this not from a harmful place, but I'm acting as like the neck, as like they talk about in the Big Fat Greek Wedding, which we love. The woman is the neck, the man is the head. I'm acting that way out of fear of my own survival and ours collected, like us together, of our survival. And then it can be met with like, if we're not emotionally meeting one another, it's this disconnection just happens.
But that's so important what you just said, Gabby, because I think this thing of like, we all sort of like love those aspects of our power and like think it's a little bit like funny that like we are able to do these things to men. But the result in that is, what I have found is like there's a consistent baseline of like, we don't respect these men that we're with, right? Like, if I know that I'm able to turn your head in whatever direction, and listen, like, some of this is like, we are the feminine oracle, like we are unbelievably wise. But there's also a way that, because men have not integrated their own feminine and their own ability to like really be in touch with those aspects of themselves, we are just like feeling like they're sort of childlike, really, and that we have to pull the strings and do all of these things. And that's great early in a relationship. But as we were talking about right before we got started, bring some kids into the equation, and all of a sudden it's really, really irritating for there to be another child that I am responsible for taking care of, in addition to the like to-do list that never ends that women have on their plate, you know?
Have you read On Our Best Behavior?
Oh, girl.
Okay, another, because I was going to say, not to like compare books, but when I was reading your book, I was like, oh my God. Like, it's so, she really lays out that historical context that you do too, of how America is built on the wounded. You said it, capitalism, white supremacy, like America's built on this wounded patriarchy.
Yes.
But so, speaking of men feeling like our children sometimes, let's get into how this affects men and men's mental health.
Yeah.
Because we're all abundantly clear on the female side. I want to get into that because I don't think we've explored that as deeply on this podcast.
Yeah, I think, you know, what I realized is that men are socialized very young not to feel, and we as women are socialized not to care that men don't feel. And I think that some of what we were talking about is like, so much of what we were raised to mean is like, I am being a good feminist and I am sort of like empowered in the way that I'm showing up for myself, is really holding a lot of contempt for men and masculinity. And most of our counterparts, our male counterparts, whether that's our friends or our brothers or, you know, our partners, grew up sitting at kitchen tables with their mothers talking about men being trash, and that, you know, our empowerment is like conquering, you know, patriarchy and like doing something about these men that are a problem. And while there's a fair amount of truth in that, what wasn't, and not the trash part, but like patriarchy, like, let me back up. But the patriarchy is a problem. There was not a lot of consideration for how that was metabolized by those young boys, what messaging that taught them about themselves. And what I find so often is men are really trying to be a good man. And what does that look like without a real sense of self? I think patriarchy conditions men to be really comfortable, to sort of lose connection to their own inner warrior. You know, there was a time, if we take it back to collectivist societies again, where men used to have sort of an initiatory space where they would be taken out by their brothers and they would be initiated into manhood, and they would really learn what it means to have an integrated sense of self. We don't have that in society anymore. If anything, maybe they have it like, you know, on sports teens in high school. I don't know. But it's not really, it's still so the outsourcing of my power. And if my peers think I'm cool, if I'm conquering a lot of women and, you know, my brothers like really like love that about me, then I am sort of powerful in the eyes of someone else. But there's not a real integrated sense of self that so many men have had an opportunity to integrate. And you know, what I think is so fascinating in terms of like couples dynamics is so often like I'm just trying to figure out what she wants me to be, you know, like the like nails on the chalkboard phrase for me is happy wife, happy life. I'm
Oh
like,
my God, yeah.
because of what that does, not only to a man's psyche and the way that he feels about himself, to constantly be suppressing himself. It's so funny, you guys. I think most of the time for couples therapy, it's sort of motivated by a woman bringing her husband in heteronormative dynamics. And so she'll be like, he won't communicate with me and he won't talk to me about any of the things. And then I will start asking him questions, and it becomes so clear to me that nobody's really asked him questions about himself. And then it's like the floodgates are open, and she's like, "Why did I bring him here?" But she's like, "Never mind." She's like, on second thought. But I think there hasn't been a lot of socialization around really being introspective, and certainly being in a relationship with their brothers in an authentic way for men. And so what I find is men are putting so much on the relational container, and my woman should be my everything, you know, and this is across the board, but they don't have that sense of like, you know, I know how to self-soothe and this is what I love to do for me. And like, listen, yes, men might like play golf and do things that they enjoy, but like that, like me, this is like what I love, sense of self. I find a lot of men are really missing. And society teaches men that the only really like acceptable outlets for experiencing emotions are through anger and sex. And so this is why, you know, I was just listening to a podcast on the way over here where it's oftentimes like, is it nature or nurture? Like how much of this is what is socialized?
The ultimate
men,
question. Yeah.
Right? Because it's like this hyper sexualized way that we are conditioned to experience men. Actually, when we break it down to these masculine and feminine energetics, the feminine is actually the driver of the sensual energy, right? So when men are in this space of constantly like, I just want to have sex with you, I just want validation from you, I just want you to give me that, it's actually really them in their wounded feminine. And so women start to feel a lot of like contempt because, you know, for men, their experience of sex is sort of external, like even our anatomy, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like what I'm experiencing externally. For women, it really needs to be an egocentric experience. We need to like be able to be in our bodies and be with ourselves. A lot of times we're just so conditioned to be taking care of all the tasks for everybody else, making sure everybody else is okay. And it's really hard to turn that off. And so if I have to take care of you by making sure you're feeling good about sex, you're getting enough sex, all of those things, I can do that. But what I find is it leads to just like this epidemic of women who are having performative sex, who are not actually aroused by their partners. They're just doing it to get them to shut up and leave me alone. And then over time, we start to feel more resentment about that. And men don't have any sort of other outlet for connection. There was a time when men would sort of really be together with their brothers, and they would be intimate with one another and tender with one another and really talking about things in the ways that we as women are more socialized to do. But I think if you look at our society, I mean, I'm just like rambling.
No, this is, you're not rambling. I'm like, you're not rambling at all.
Keep going. Never stop.
But if you look at like the majority of violent crimes, they are committed by men who are suppressing their feminine, their emotional landscape, and not in relationship with it. And you know, these things come at a cost. It's like we can't selectively numb. And if men are numbing the feminine aspects of who they are, it's like I love to use the example of like a beach ball that you're pushing down underwater. Like you can hold it down for a really long time, but eventually it's going to come to the surface and it's going to be aggressive and it's going to be scary. And a lot of times, you know, it'll feel like it's maladaptive behavior, but it's like they're doing so much work to not feel. And it's really coming to a cost for all of us as a society. So I'm like, no, we all need to care that men aren't feeling.
Hey everyone, popping in to say thank you to all of the amazing people who listen and watch this podcast. We're so grateful for each and every one of you and truly cannot say thank you enough for tuning in every single week.
In order for us to keep bringing you all great conversations and continue building our community and raising the bar, we're asking you for some simple and free support. Subscribe to our channel, follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts, and keep up with us on social at Thoughts May Vary Pod.
And if you're looking to dive even deeper, you can join our exclusive Patreon community and download Co-Create, our digital manifestation journal filled with over 150 prompts to help guide your curiosity and unlock new layers of yourself.
Thanks for being here.
Well, how do we shift that collective conversation too? Because listen, obviously as a woman, I can understand, and I'm acted like this for a very long time, where the default narrative was, well, fuck men, they're trash.
Yeah.
Like, they're all trash. And so I understand where that narrative comes from, of course. And I understand why there's that resentment and anger. But I also really believe that this is getting us absolutely nowhere.
That's right.
Because we're not fixing anything. We're just continuing to pit ourselves against one another. And even for the quote unquote good men out there, they're going to be listening to the good women out there speaking like this about them. And they're going to be like, well, fuck her then. And then it's this cycle, right? Yeah. So how do we adjust this cultural narrative when we're still living in this time that's suppressing that?
Yeah. From my perspective, the biggest problem relationally is that we start with a baseline that everyone should be partnered, and that there's something wrong when people aren't in a partnership. And so it's like, so-and-so is such a great person. Why haven't they found someone yet, right? Which puts all of this pressure on everyone, really, to sort of partner off and get the thing done. And if I'm not partnered, I'm somehow incomplete or defective, or there's something wrong with me. And what I find that leads to is a lot of a lack of discernment, certainly on our part as women. And, you know, just a lot of like partnering for some distorted reasons. And I certainly start off the book talking about like me and like the decision to get married not really being from like, I have so much compassion for my younger self. I was younger, but not really like intentional in terms of like why I wanted to spend my life walking side by side with this person I was marrying. And I think that is such a common thing. It's like, I'm of a certain age, all my friends are doing this. We got to get the deal done. And you know, a lot of times when I sit with couples, and if I'm talking to a woman who's like really in a space of frustration with all of like, you know, you've heard this whole fair play conversation and how there's like not an equal distribution of the emotional labor and all of the things that we do for our kids. And, you know, I'll say to the woman, and so did this just start? Like, did this just start when you guys had kids? Or, you know, and it's always, this is who he always was. He wasn't sort of that, like, equal partner, or there were ways he didn't have a sense of self, or maybe there was a belief in his potential and that, like, I'll get him where I need to get him. It'll just take me some time. And that is the feminine space of, like, we always see possibility and expansion and where this could go. But men can be a little bit linear. And so it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, as long as we're doing things, they sort of think there's no problem. And so they're like, well, this is just who we are. And so a lot of times I'm like, our work as women is really to take a lot of personal responsibility for where are we making choices that are not aligned with like the greater truth that we know to be true about this relationship and ourselves, and like some of what our motivations are that might feel a little icky to get into. And, you know, it's so funny. I was doing a live with, shout out to my brother, Jeremiah Latimo, because he's just like such a brilliantly beautiful blend, I think, of this masculine and feminine energetic. But we were doing a live the other day and we were joking. We're like, everybody just needs like a restart. Like, just leave each other alone for a minute. For like, real. Let's take a like massive pause. Restart. Everybody like step back. And I'm saying that kidding, but I do think there is something in what I have found so healing in my relationship with the masculine collective is to really sort of restructure my relationships with men where I'm not centering romantic relationships, and I'm building just like really solid friendships and like having brothers in my life who I feel so unbelievably supported and seen by without agenda. And it's like sort of like rewiring my nervous system to know that that's possible. And I believe the future of relationships is that we're going to join in relationships when it's justified, not because we're incomplete. So when two people have sort of a shared vision of what they want their lives to be, and they've really come into that conscious space of like, this is what we want in a partnership, then it makes sense, but not because either of us are incomplete. It'll be more like, you know, do I want to give up this space of my solitude and all of the things that I love about life? And not actually, like, let me back up, not give up, because I think we get to co-create lives that feel really good and true for ourselves, but you know, when you're in a partnership, there are certainly, especially when you have kiddos, there are compromises, and I don't love the word compromise, but there are things that you need to do to come into alignment, right?
Well, it doesn't mean you might need to grieve a life that you thought you were going to have. Like it really does sound like how I found my husband, and I had just spent 8 months healing from a really abusive relationship, so like was actively not looking, wanted to be by myself, wanted to heal, wanted to go through the whole thing, and found someone. I was like, oh my God, it's me in male form. Like, now what? You know, we tell the whole story and it's a joke, but it really was like I was coming from that space of like not looking and wanting to heal, and he is so grounded in his feminine and so balanced and so beautiful. But when you were speaking about the actionable ways for us to decentralize these romantic relationships and have like these positive spaces and relationships with masculine energy, whether it's men or whoever identifies as a man, how can we do that without also like looking at the sisterhood and looking at the history of the patriarchy? Like, I just find that at least the TikTok rhetoric, if you will, like the cultural zeitgeist is very much like, yes, placating to we need to do these things, but then doing the real work of like looking at our healing at the same time. Like, without doing that, you're not going to be able to take the aligned action without like looking at the past and the healing. And I have so much empathy and understanding for it because it fucking hurts and it sucks, and intergenerational trauma is deep and collective wounds are deep. Like, I totally have compassion for it, but I'm like, please care about it. Like, it makes me want to bang my head against the wall sometimes because we throw these flippant like mental health it's June, it's Men's Mental Health Month, so you see all these flippant like this matters, and it's like, when are we ever collectively going to go deeper? And I think it's now going back to the age of Aquarius. I think now you're just starting to see like it percolating. Like, voices like yours bring me so much fucking hope. Oh my God. Just so. How has having a son, was that kind of the catalyst for your own work and doing that? Or tell me all about like raising a boy with this perspective.
So I'm like, tell me.
Like, tell us everything. Tell us everything.
I'm gonna cry. Like, I don't know why that just made me so emotional as you asked that, because he was the game changer. Every part of my world sort of recalibrated in this beautiful little being. And you're right, Gabby, like, there's something about boy moms. From the moment he came out of my body, it was like he used to just like touch my face and look at me, and I'd be like, what is happening?
It like gives me chills. I know.
Just like, but the thing also was like watching the purity of him and his integrated feminine energy, and how much like, you know, he would be just like when he started walking and like going to preschool with his little friends, and like the little boys would be like, let's hold hands and snuggle, and like so pure and so beautiful. And I'd be like, how do I not allow the world to interrupt this or take this from him? And I just felt like, like I could see clearly how we do, you know, what Bell Hooks talks about is like the natural traumatization of little boys every day, and that nobody questions it. We've just made it so normal to really like dampen their life force and make a way that, and you know, he's 7 now, but even now I notice in school, like the boys are like, we don't like pink, and it's like little things. And I'm like, well, buddy, let's talk about it, right? Because you've loved pink. Let's get into the conversation. And he's, you know, I think there's a lot that is changing, and we are evolving. And I love, Meta, that you like know about all of the shifts that we are experiencing by design collectively in this moment in history. But I think the Aquarian age is this like renaissance of the feminine, and we are living through a time where we're not sort of replacing a patriarchal culture with a matriarchal one from my perspective, but it's going to be a more integrated way of being, and that we celebrate that like everybody is supposed to be the precise being that they came into this body to be. I don't know if you guys know Alok and their work.
Dream podcast guest.
Can I just come and hang when you do? Will you please text me?
Oh, come. Like, we'll do a we'll do a whole panel of us
to meet
Alok
as well.
God, keep going.
Yeah, but I just
Love them.
I really dream of a day where like each of us is defining for ourselves what our version of like the blend of masculine and femininity and the blend of like the perfect relationship and all of these things we're defining for ourselves. And I brought up Alok because I think there's so much about the way they are moving through the world that I find so inspiring in terms of like everything that activates you about me is really, what you have been conditioned to suppress within yourself. But that's true of our romantic relationships as well. Like,
Totally.
I realized as I was watching couples, I was like, God, there's so many ways we are just conditioned to outsource our power. And if I can just get this person to comply with who I need them to be for me to be okay, then I'll be okay. And what I realized was, what was certainly true for me in my 12-year marriage, is there was a way that I was able to hide out from doing some of that deeper work that you're talking about, Meadow. It's like, I didn't have to, because I could just make him the problem, and I could just sort of like, if he would just meet my needs.
Don't read me, Phil.
I felt your body go, ah.
My therapist has said that to me. She's like, what are we really talking about here? And I'm like, what do you mean, Sarah? Excuse you.
Damn it, Sarah.
We love a good read from the therapist. Like, yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, but it's like, in Jungian psychology, we talk about the individuation process, which is where I sort of start off the book. That this is like, we've lost track of like, we came here to develop and become more self-actualized versions of self. But there's a lot of ways that our relationship structures are just a way where we're sort of like hiding out and like numbing our inability to continue that process. And it's really supported by clinical psychology. I'm like,
this is why everything you're saying is the spiritual side of it, right? It's supported by that. This is why we also always say on this podcast, your triggers are your responsibility.
Oof, girl.
Yeah.
I'm like,
that's so real.
Yeah, we just.
I know you have a lot to say though,
Oh,
so
no,
please,
I'm
before
I'm
I
like,
jump
please.
in. Yeah.
No, I'm just like holding it in. I'm like, I make everyone the problem. Okay, but let's dig into that about what you were saying of there's so much growth to be had, because I am fascinated by how much relationships hold mirrors up to us.
Yeah.
And the relationship that I'm in now, we've been together for 2 years, and it's the healthiest love I've ever experienced. And we're so damn compatible. Like, it's so great. But so much came out of me, especially in the beginning. So much emotion, crying, work that I've experienced because I was like, oh shit, I'm like, A, safe enough to explore this. And B, like, my shit's not flying anymore with you, because you're also meeting me there being like, hold on, you have a right to be upset, but like, we're not going to talk to each other like that. And like, we have a baseline respect, and just the mirror has been held.
Oh, girl, I love that for him. Like, yes, Kate.
Oh, yes. No, truly has really, I have to give him his flowers where they're due. Like, he has really redefined for me what masculinity is. Beautiful. But anyway, I heard you speak about this on a podcast, and I loved how you phrased it, where you said something along the lines of relationships can be really rich soil for our becoming.
Yes.
And I want to dig into what we were just talking about of how we can best nurture both ourselves, but also this relationship that we're in together, and how we can do those things at the same time.
Yeah, I just have to like pause on one thing you said, because I think this is the thing that, well, this is regardless of how we identify in terms of gender, but certainly for us as women, a man with all of the things that we like say that we want in a man is going to activate out of us, because it is like such, like, we want a man with a backbone. We want a man with a sense of self. And here's what, he is not going to let you run him. Direct him. And it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just like so beautifully uncomfortable, and just like the precise medicine I think that we need a lot of times. And there's this thing of like, we don't even realize how hungry we are for that level of, and I am going to use the word containment because it feels like really containing. This is some of the yin and the yang, right? Like I was talking to a friend of mine about like the ways that we sort of have pathologized things that are a part of our nature, and that like what magnetizes us, and that like, there are ways that men and women aren't the same. And there are overlaps in, it's like this thing of holding multiple truths at the same time. And that
our favorite thing.
Yeah, that like we have to be able to do that. And that like I didn't even realize until like I had a man like hold that space of like, hey, I got you. And I was like, oh. I had no idea how hungry I was to feel that level of containment. And a lot of the way that we're socialized is to feel that that's not me being a good feminist or like able to do all these things for myself. And there's like a very somatic response that we have to some of the things like you're describing, right? I just went on
Thanks.
tangent.
He'll love that.
No, well, it also sounds like you're unpacking. Like you get the thing you wanted to manifest, and you're like, oh, it brings up other things I didn't see, but how good for me.
It makes you release that control.
Yeah.
Because we say, we just want, the narrative right now on the internet is like, I just want to sit back into my feminine and relax into it. I'm like, do you, girl?
Girl,
you might.
I
Because
promise you
I
might
said
not.
the same thing, and I do like it, but it is a challenge because I want to feel that, but I also fucking love control. So then when I get met, and he's like, I thought you wanted to be in your feminine. I thought you wanted to like sit back and relax and, you know, whatever. So it is, you're right. Anyway.
Well, it's the control because the feminine is sort of the dark, wild, unknown spaces. Like we think of feminine as like, you know, goddess era wearing dresses. And it's not that like those parts of our radiance aren't a part of it, and it is so much like the mess of our emotions. Like I've realized
of it too, right? Light and shadow,
the dark aspects of our feminine, that like I will catch myself like shaming my feminine, like reflexively, like Dené, there's nothing wrong, suck it up, why are you crying?
Obsessed with you.
Right? Obsessed with you. But yeah, it's like so much like we are all conditioned to feel like our feminine is supposed to still be something that is put in a box and is easily contained and is small and pretty and, you know, doesn't disrupt anyone. And that is not actually the feminine. The feminine is wild and changing moment to moment, breath to breath. So,
oh my God, it literally makes me cry. I'm so in love with you.
And that like and to your point, like that is really uncomfortable because we don't get to know what it's going to look like, right? We don't get to contain it. We don't get to have control over our future. And a lot of like our existential angst, and so much of why I believe we've spent thousands of years with this sort of patriarchal prescriptive of like what life should be is because it's given us the illusion of safety. And it's given us like, this is what we know. If we just, you know, go to school, get a house and a picket fence and retire with a 401k, we'll be safe. And it's like, I think, you know, the ushering in of the Aquarian age came with this whole 2020, like disruption and like all of these things that were right below the surface that we weren't really looking at started to come up where we couldn't unsee them. And now it's like, who do we want to be as a human race if all of those structures that we'd put all of our faith in were always an illusion? And that can either be deeply destabilizing and the thing that we sort of like shut down and are afraid of, or we get to be co-creators and we get really enlivened by that and say, if we get to create for our children a world beyond our wildest dreams, like if we can create heaven on earth, what do we want it to look like, you know?
Oh my God, gives me chills.
Me too. One of my favorite lines in your book was you said something, I feel like I wrote it down, but you said something about oppressive structures like have to know the way things are going to play out in order to do it. And that was ringing in my head as you were saying that, because it's back to that women were the collective. We understand the ways of the world. We got called witch. So they're like, how do we keep this from happening? We section them off and pit them as competitors and match people. And you have to be one-on-one. Like it really is all that historical nature that unless we talk about it or unless we're raised with these conversations, like you said at the beginning, like my public school never went over that. And talking about, like thinking about the book Sapiens or like the history of humankind and evolution. Like we did not cover that.
Oh, we are hanging out.
We are hanging out. We're starting a book club.
We're thrilled about this.
Thrilled. But like this is why we need these conversations. Because like how are we supposed to explore this and then figure out how to not repeat an illusion? Because we could have the best intentions and repeat an illusion if our egos are still getting in the way. So how are we going to to figure that out?
So many things.
Good one.
I'm like, like I just felt that in my body. I was like, ooh, girl.
Put that in the trailer.
Right? That's real. Yeah. I mean, so many things. Did you see the movie Poor Things?
No.
Obsessed.
I haven't seen it yet.
It's really good.
Another movie came to my brain when you were talking, but go on about Poor Things.
It also took me by surprise. Like I didn't see what's the other one that he did. I just didn't know how sexual it was going to be, and I kind of loved it. But I didn't realize that was going to be such a theme.
Yeah.
Anyway, please
I don't
continue.
know. I don't know that much about him, but I loved the film. And you know, there's so many ways in what you were saying that like we have just been conditioned to hold things as like a baseline of normal that we're not seeing as like the perpetuation of our oppression. For instance, that thing you were saying about how these structures are well aware that a woman, as she reaches around 38 to like 42, she starts to enter what I call her enchantress era. I started to say I call it, but like I think I read that somewhere.
So you claim it.
I call it her enchantress era. But I started to realize this is like what's happening.
Yeah.
And society makes it like she just starts to get really hormonal. Her kids are leaving the house. She's having all of these problems. And what I realized is, oh no, what happens is women start to remember their witch. Like we go through a period, like we go maiden, mother, and then, you know, we've been taught to like go archetypally to the crone, but there's this period in between the mother and the crone that nobody's talking about. And this is when women start to remember how powerful we are if we are willing to really tune out the noise and sort of challenge some of these things that we've been fed. And what I have found is a lot of the ways that we are perpetuating these patriarchal narratives are like, we don't want to age, or we somehow become less valuable in our 40s, when I'm like, this is literally the best I've ever been. I'm like a fine wine girl.
Every woman in their 40s
who doesn't
says
want to
that.
be 40?
Yes.
Like, why? It's ridiculous. But there's, you know, there's just these ways that like society knows that. So they condition us to value youth, and that men will want to be with a woman when she's younger because she's more valuable. And is it because she's more valuable, or is it because women in their 40s will challenge some of these, you know, ways of being in a way that a younger woman hasn't really evolved into understanding? Like, you know, it's developmental. It's not her fault that she
26
doesn't.
prefrontal cortex.
Most of
How
us
are you even
didn't,
going to know? Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's like when we recognize these things and we understand like our resistance is really in one, like unapologetically, like I was when we started off saying, like unapologetically taking up space in my power and knowing that that will be activating sometimes to people, not because you shouldn't do that or because of like who you are being. It's not with malice that you're like standing in your power, I guess is my point, but that your power reminds other people of where they've sort of like turned away from theirs, right? But also I believe for us as women, like the thing that we can do is say like, I'm not going to be in wounded masculine energy of like, I hate men, or I like hold contempt for anything. I'm just going to take so much personal responsibility for creating a life that I love. And like, to me, loving our life is like the most profound resistance possible.
Totally.
And it's like, this is what patriarchy doesn't want women to do. They don't want us to be like out here frolicking, loving our lives. So can't make me not love my life.
You can't make me. Active resistance. It really is.
There is a question that I'm selfishly wanting to talk to you about. I went through an interesting experience recently that I think people can relate to. I went through an experience probably like 6 months ago where it was just this point in my relationship where we came to like a cross point. And we really had to decide, what are we going to do here? Are we going to choose to fight for this? And it was the first time that I had chosen to fight for the relationship. And I don't even know if that's like the right verbiage, but like that's the verbiage I have. And it made me so uncomfortable because I had never, again, been in like a relationship like this. And this is sort of the first like real partnership I've had. But because of that, when I started to want to fight for it, the initial feeling that came to the surface was, you're such a weak girl that why don't you just like walk away? And so I guess my question to you is, I wonder through your work if you've seen this with couples, like when is sort of the line of you're fighting for a relationship that is healthy and you're putting in work because it's not going to be like a walk in the park all the time, versus having that intuitive understanding of when it's time to actually walk away from something?
Love this question, Gabby. Okay, so many things, right? I think the struggles and what's tough in relationships, so I'm going to answer this in a couple layers, right? Are a lot of times that is where our inner inquiry is really important, because I do think a lot of times when we're in alignment, relationships can be so much easier than we are conditioned to believe that they should be. But a lot of times it's like, this is why people in their like second and third marriages later in life have so much relational fulfillment. It's because their expectations of the relationship have gone so far down and they're so solidified in a sense of self by that age that they're really not looking for anyone to complete them or do all of these things for them, right? So there's that, right? I think, and listen, when we're talking about, you know, when we're in the age of like having children and things like that, some of those things you're talking about are the ways that we have to maybe work a little bit harder to come into alignment and to like negotiate the stories we're telling ourselves about like what we're entitled to or not, all of that stuff, right? But what you're speaking to in terms of, and another place where I felt it in my body as you said it, I was like, oh, yeah, feel that. That thing of like, really, we've been conditioned to believe that it is weak to like desire a man to love me and want to stay with me and to need like his containment, like all of those things I was talking about, like feeling so good. Like we're conditioned to believe that that's weakness. Yeah. And that that is like most of us being conditioned as women to really embody a wounded masculine shield and armor that we move through life with for the most part, right? And so to me, I find so much strength in my softening now. I think the more that I am like able to look at all of the men in my life, and you know, certainly with my kid's dad, like he's like, I know I'm amazing, stop telling me. But, like,
he's like, I get it.
He's like, yes, we're clear. But I think that to me is like where my strength lies, and my ability to like really bear witness and celebrate men and not feel like any part of me is diminished at all by being soft. Like it takes an incredible amount of strength to like put down my armor and say, yes, like I need men in my life. That there's so many incredible things about the masculine collective that I think, you know, one of my favorite spiritual teachers, Wayne Dyer, used to say, see the light in people and treat them as if that is all that you see and watch them rise to meet you there.
Right. I did a Ram Dass meditation this morning about find the light in you, and when's the last time you saw it in you, so how are you supposed to see it in someone else if you don't see it?
Yeah, because why wouldn't you?
I swear to God. Sorry to interrupt.
It's like the synchronicities. I'm like,
yes. Obviously, yeah.
Yes.
But what I have found is so much of like what we think is effective in relationships is if I just like continue to tell you what you're not doing or where you're falling short, then you'll get there. And it's like, think about the changes that we've attempted to make for ourselves in our life, right? Like, it's like, I'm going to start eating quinoa tomorrow, right? Like, it's just like, it never really comes to fruition because change is hard for all of us. Sustainable change, right? Like we can do it for a day or two, but we really sort of disregard that in our partners. And this is where we dehumanize them, right? Like, and that's a little bit of what you're saying. Like when my person, when the one comes around, they're not going to be human. Of course they're going to be human. But our work is to see their humanity and like hold it with reverence, and that like, just like me, they have pain points just like me. They didn't get everything they needed in childhood just like me. They are scared standing in front of another person saying, can you love me? And I think that is like, to me, the biggest thing that we as women are conditioned to like disregard is like, these men are just like us attempting to love us, and most of the time we're sort of telling them they're not doing it well, which when we say that, it's like, okay, well, if that's who I am, that's who I'm going to be. I'm not going to keep trying. Whereas I find when I celebrate the hell out of my kid's dad, he's like, oh, you like that? You want some more of that?
Yeah. Like watch sort of what rises. Else I got. Yeah.
But that's a part of like the masculine, that mission. Like we want a mission. Like I want to be what you want me to be. And so you know, all of that to say, I think some of that is like your really healthy energy that says like, this matters to me and I'm gonna like not be afraid to say that and own that. And I think that requires a tremendous amount of strength.
I mean, these are the conversations. I'm just so
Be
grateful.
The third co-host.
Yeah.
Like, come back anytime.
Never leave.
I'm like,
you guys are stuck with me now.
Good. Thank God. Thank God. Because I'm like, how has it even been an hour? I have so much more we could get into.
Well, I mean,
have to do it again.
I have to do it again.
We're going to stalk Alok and then we're going to
form a podcast all of us together. Perfect.
Oh
in a book club and all. I'm so grateful for your perspective, for your friendship, for this conversation. Like this, our community is going to love this conversation.
Yes.
I'm so grateful for you for being here and having it with us.
Yes.
And for writing this amazing book.
Best.
And speaking of book club, like our community are huge readers and they're just going to dive into this. Can I ask you? Sorry, we're doing this online now. We both love to write and are writers as well.
Yeah.
And I found it so interesting. And I was like, I have to ask her about the intentional choice to make every letter of the start lowercase.
seen by you.
I was like obsessed with it.
She's like, I gotta ask
We
her.
argue
She gets
about
here.
lowercase. We argue about capitalization on this podcast a lot. Shut up.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw it and I was like, this is a style choice and I need to know
It looks
everything.
chic.
Like, it looks so good and I've never. Tell me about
I had
it.
to fight for it a little bit.
Shut
I was
up.
like, I really want them all to be because
I love
like on my
it.
Instagram, I always write in lowercase, which drives my friend Vanessa crazy.
Vanessa?
Hey,
You.
Vanessa.
Yeah.
And
Like,
my
She's a
number.
Taurus, P.S.
Yeah.
And we find like but
Your
I'm a
Libra moon is
Yeah,
showing. Yeah,
totally,
yeah.
totally.
I saw that and was like, we're going to talk about that.
It looks
Yeah, well, to Sounds
Obsessed.
True's credit, they were like, yes, it's weird.
Sure,
but
sure.
Danae, go ahead.
Yeah.
But yes, I was like, please, it just like makes
it.
sense to me. I would rather like
Yeah.
at least like start off.
It almost
lower.
feels, you know what's so funny? It feels softer.
You're the first
Yeah.
person to
It
notice.
really? It
really?
feels softer. Like it felt so intentional to me.
Aw.
Truly.
I'm
so
obsessed with
oh my god, no, you're
I
sticking
literally-
around
Yeah.
forever. I'm telling you.
You're the first person to notice. That.
Wow. Oh, I'm so honored.
I'm so
We get
honored.
each other. What can
yeah.
I say?
I feel
Wow.
unbelievably seen.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you. And
Obviously, same.
Yeah.
Like through the bodily
yeah,
responses.
well, let's have a 4-way date because you need
Yeah.
to
Oh
meet
my
Vanessa
God.
Yeah,
too.
I'm like,
You'll
hey,
love
Vanessa,
her as well.
hit my line.
And she holds me down, and
Yeah.
I can tell that
Oh
it's
my
a really
gosh.
beautiful
Perfect.
symbiotic relationship.
You are so
Truly.
special. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
doing this.
You both. Thank you so much.
That was fun.
I'm not even kidding though. You're gonna have to come back.
How's it going, y'all? It's Aaron. Don't let your Monday suck. Don't have those Sunday scaries. I'm tired of everybody waking up in the week saying, shit, it's Monday. You know what goes down? TMV releases every week on Mondays. Make sure you rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're watching YouTube, yes, TMV has a YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and ring that noti bell and never miss a thing. And also, join the TMV Familia by joining the Thoughts May Vary Patreon and by following @Thoughts May Vary Pod on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you for listening.
Great.
There you go.
Thanks, AB.
Got y'all.